Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to the session 3 of our meeting, Implementing Federal Standards and International Standards. We have for our first panel Dr. Murray Lumpkin, Mac Lumpkin, and also Dr. Jerry Menikoff. Let me introduce Dr. Lumpkin to you first. He is the 21-year career officer and the Deputy Commissioner for International Programs at the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. In this role, he is responsible for overseeing all of FDA's international activities, and this includes overseeing the FDA's interactions with foreign counterparts, multinational health organizations, managing foreign capacity building and harmonizing programs, and administering foreign confidentiality agreements, quite a large portfolio. In addition, Dr. Lumpkin oversees the activities of the FDA's Office of International Programs and its 13 foreign FDA offices located across the globe, which were developed and implemented, these programs, all developed and implemented under his leadership. Mac Lumpkin, we're delighted to have you here.
Great, thank you. I've always said this is why they never let me in the Center for Devices, because I cannot make these things work. I do appreciate very, very much the invitation to be here. I'm delighted to be here. And our Commissioner, Peggy Hamburg, who always loves coming to New York, seeing how this is from whence she came, asked me to specifically tell all of you on behalf of our agency, thank you for allowing us to be part of your discussions. I want to spend just a couple of minutes with you this morning kind of talking a little bit further about some of the things that Christine talked so beautifully this morning with you about. And that's kind of the FDA lens on the international component of the questions that you're talking about today. And it's a bit of an odd lens in a sense in that for those of you that know FDA and have followed it, our fundamental mission has not changed. We are a domestic consumer and patient health protection and health promotion agency. We have a domestic mission. What has fundamentally changed in our life over the past 15 years is that the products that we're responsible for and the clinical data that we are responsible for now have a global pedigree. And it's that global pedigree that's very, very different from the world before 1990, and I want to show you a little bit about it. So the question really is kind of FDA, where do we fit into this enterprise that you all are looking at? And as I said, I hope this is helpful to you, but I really have to say, if I'm totally honest about it, I'm really very hopeful that you're going to be able to help us. Because I think at the very end, I'll give you some examples of some of the very challenging and very perplexing ethical issues that are coming up for us in the world that we're involved in that we could use some help. And I'm hoping to a great degree that this commission will help us on that. So where do we fit in? Well, I mean, the basic piece that FDA does when it comes to looking at the medicinal products that are available in this country is that we are assigned by Congress to assess the benefit-risk profile of products that companies wish to market in our country by looking at the totality of the data that they submit to us, including the preclinical, the clinical, and the manufacturing process data. Now, after looking at these data in very, very many ways, if the demonstrated benefits of the product outweigh the known risks of the product for the intended population when used as directed, the product basically meets our legal and scientific standard for marketing in this country, provided that the manufacturer can indeed produce it in a consistent manner over time. So when we're doing this, we obviously are looking at the scientific validity of the data, the clinical relevance of the data, the completeness of the data, and the ethics of the data. For the general principle is, and always has been, under our implementing regulations, is that we can't authorize a product if the data that are used to support this benefit-risk profile determination are unethically obtained. And so the question for us within the world that you all are looking at, and we could spend days and days talking about many different aspects of not only the ethics of it, but the scientific robustness of it, is what does it mean for data to have been obtained in an ethical manner? And I think for us that was probably much easier to answer 20 years ago because of the situation that existed as to the pedigree of the data and where it was coming from at that point in time. And if you look at some of the data that I'm putting up here, and going back in 1990, about 96% of the clinical investigations that we would see data from came basically from either North America or Western Europe. By 2007, that was now down to 54%. Non-U.S. and multinational studies are clearly an ever-increasing proportion of the data that's submitted to us to substantiate marketing applications. In 2007, over 60% of the pivotal studies that were submitted to us as primary studies to support a marketing application of a drug had one or more non-U.S. study sites. And this is not only as far as drugs are concerned, we're seeing it more and more in the world when we get to biologics and we get to medical devices. The HHS Inspector General about a year and a half ago began a look at this whole issue of foreign clinical trials and FDA's role in overseeing foreign clinical trials. And some of the data they came up with in their report here, just to underscore what I'm talking about, is that in 2008, sponsors that submitted marketing applications to us had over 230,000 subjects that were enrolled in over 6,500 non-U.S. sites in 28 different countries. And when you look at those countries, this is about 2008. Western Europe accounted for about 60% of the non-U.S. sites, and the other 40% was evenly divided, as you can see there. And this is not a phenomenon that's just happening here in the United States, and I know you're going to hear from some of my colleagues from the European Union tomorrow. They have also, as you will hear tomorrow, been very much involved in looking at this issue because they're faced with the same situation we are. And if you look at some of their data from 2005 to 2009 and looking at what they call market authorization applications, about 39% of the clinical data that they get comes from within the EU, meaning about 60% of their data comes from outside the EU. And Fergus Sweeney, who is one of the senior leaders within the European Medicines Agency, I think made a wonderful comment at their session a couple of months ago on this question. And he said, you know, we're kind of at an interesting point right now that it doesn't matter where you stand. If you're in the United States, if you're in the European Union, if you're in China, the majority of clinical trials are being conducted someplace else. That no one anywhere in the world right now gets to say we do the majority of the clinical trials. So this idea of getting marketing applications coming into you where the majority of the clinical trials are being conducted someplace else is a phenomenon that, as the pendulum is swinging, we're kind of at the point where everybody is at a place where the majority are being done someplace else from their vantage point. And when you look at some of Fabio Tier's work out of MIT, when he went back and looked through this last decade, a large part of it, looking at the change in global clinical trials, I think many people have rightly said that pendulum is swinging from where the majority of clinical trials were done in North America and Western Europe to the point now where they're being done all over, to the point where they're going to be done in other parts of the world, as you can see here. And many of these are areas of the world that have not been the traditional sites for the clinical trials that have been used to support marketing applications. Just a little more data from Philip Ward, and the point here is he was doing an article primarily on the growth of phase 3 clinical trials in India, and the data that he presented showing that it's growing in India, phase 3 trials 7 times faster than the global average. So that this is data that for phase 3 clinical trials that started in 2008, which means that we will probably begin to see these data in marketing applications starting next year or the year after, giving us about a 4-year lag time from when a phase 3 trial starts until we see the data completed in a marketing application. Well, FDA has been looking at foreign data. Getting data from overseas is not new to us. What is new to us is the amount of foreign data that we're getting from overseas. Our regulations go back basically several decades about the use of foreign data to support marketing applications. There is nothing in our regulations that says you have to do your clinical trials in the United States. There's nothing that says you have to do your clinical trials under a U.S. IND if you're doing them outside the United States. If you're doing them obviously within our country, you have to do, at least for the sites in the U.S., have to be under an IND. But if you're going to bring in data from overseas and say, I want you to use these data to support the benefit-risk determination for this product, these are kind of the four main buckets of things we need to be able to do in order to use data from outside the United States. And really, when you think about it, they're what we use for data from the United States, too. And that is that you have to be able to validate the data. You have to have clinical investigators with recognized competence. You have to conduct them in accordance with GCPs using independent ethics boards, review, approval, and continuing oversight. And you have to make it applicable to the U.S. And I know we talked a little bit this morning when Christine was here about GCP. And I think really what we see in our regulations on good clinical practices is that it is an effort that we've worked with people in many parts of the world to develop a standard that sets a framework that not only reflects our legal and regulatory authority here in the U.S., but also incorporates both the reality of the quality and the integrity of the scientific data and the protection of human subjects. Because we would argue that clearly the protection of human subjects is kind of the traditional area that ethics has looked at, but also to do a scientifically dubious trial, or one that you cannot interpret at the end of the day, raises ethical questions about exposing subjects to investigational products when you don't get any valid information out of it for the community or for the individual to do there. And one of the things in our 312 regulations is that we do not allow just certification to these things. There's certain things that, as far as the descriptions and the data, and I know you all who have looked at our present regulations on this know when it comes to independent ethics community independent ethics boards, IECs, that indeed there's certain things that are listed here that we want people and we require people to do when they are giving us data from overseas. We heard about this morning from Christine, so I won't go into the ICH GCP, but obviously if people have questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that. And some of the other very worthwhile and helpful GCP documents that have spun off from the ICH, the ones from PAHO and PANDRA, the ones from ISO and others. And I think what I just wanted to show you here before I just give you some of the things that have been particularly perplexing to us is that to give you just some idea of the inspections that we've had to do outside the United States because of clinical trials and being done in other parts. It's kind of a roll call of the United Nations. Looking at places where we've had to send our GCP inspections because people were using data from studies done in these countries. Part of this is we don't have the ability to inspect each and every study. We don't have that even here within the United States. And one of the things that we have spent a fair amount of time on is trying to work more and more with our counterparts overseas on how we can collaboratively work together so that indeed we don't have to inspect every one of these, that people are at and are getting at more of a comparable level overseas. That's just to show you some of the training in GCP that we did with our Chinese counterparts. And just to put on the table for you all here on some of the ethical issues that we get faced with, to go back to that first question of what does it mean for the studies to have been conducted in an ethical manner? There is indeed, as we talked about this morning, the idea you can go down the checklist. Did you comply? But I think part of what we're seeing here is compliance with certain rules and regulations might be a first step, but it's not the end-all and be-all. That there is a thought process, that there are actual real-time situations that arise that take people have to sit down and think about what it means, how we're going to use those kind of situations and interpret them within our own context. One of the ones we have is ethics committees, especially the ongoing oversight, the conflicts of interest we heard about today, and documentation. And what does that mean with these overseas? This very perplexing issue of individual ethics versus population ethics, and the one that people have brought up to us of saying, even if everybody has done things perfectly when it comes to the ethics of the individual and the protection of the individual, if indeed a company is not going to market the product in the area where the study was done, has there been a violation of population ethics? Has there been a violation of the social contract with the community, as opposed to the community benefiting from the data from those within their community who participated? And the question then, because When people submit applications to FDA, the companies are not required to tell us where they're going to market it, where they're not going to market it. That's not any of our business. It's never been our business in the past. It's not a question we can ask, but it does raise the question in the sense of, well, is this ethical data in terms of our being able to use it? We have issues on clinical trial design. Some of those were brought up this morning. One of them is basically the issue of standard of care in other parts of the world, and what does it mean if standard of care in another part of the world is different from standard of care here? Can we use data to make a marketing decision here in the U.S. from a trial design that is considered ethical in another setting, but would not be considered ethical within the U.S. setting? For those kind of questions. And last slide here, last but not least, some of the questions you guys brought up this morning are the same ones we deal with. What does it mean to define legitimate consent? We all agree that consent is an integral principle. It's an unalienable principle of what we're talking about here. But what does it mean practically when it's coming from a society where men and women have different legal rights? What does it mean when it comes from a society that's hierarchical with elder decision-making models? What does it mean in societies with high levels of illiteracy? What constitutes coercion in situations where access to standard medical care is limited or non-existent, and where trials are presented and give people a chance to indeed have care that perhaps otherwise they would not have access to? And at what point does that cross the threshold of coercion versus actual informed consent to be in there? And so it's kind of this thing at the end, which to us is the ongoing issue here, is that what is the perspective by which these are judged? Do you do it by your perspective as the reviewing authority for your own jurisdiction, or by the perspective of where it was done? Thank you very much.
Jerry,